Ladies and gentlemen, дамы и господа, welcome to part 2. This is a continuation of episode 1. Episode 1 I spoke about the awakening, and in this episode I'll speak about the experiments which followed. This is a story of how I spent my first couple of years in my early adult life and how I was able to reach an inflection point. And so in the last episode I mentioned that I had an existential crisis. I meditated for the first time in my life for 2 hours. I received a voice, a signal to pull the trigger, and I dropped everything I was doing. Mind you, I was in university, I had a little bit of cash, and I booked a one-way ticket to Austin, Texas. And so I arrived in Austin in March of 2023. A little carry-on suitcase, all of my belongings, a little cash, and no job, no employment, no connections, no place to stay. I mean, I booked a hotel that night, but essentially starting from scratch. To me, although I was born in America and raised in America, this felt like a pursuit of the American dream. And as anxious as I was also very excited. I had a mix of delusion, but I was ready to invent myself in this new city. Now, I'm not here to tell people what to do. I simply wanted to share my experiences, what I've learned, and what has got me to the position I am in today. I'm neither a chest-pumping entrepreneur nor a dismissive skeptic of a 9-to-5 job, but I think a little anecdote on this concept of risk is very useful. Risk is inherent in everything. Why? Well, because nothing is guaranteed. There's a non-zero and a non-absolute probability of the desired outcome. What game theory teaches us is to take those bets that leave us with asymmetric returns. By the law of large numbers, i.e. a very large number of repetitions, of rolling the dice, although that's a very horrible analogy, or sitting in on more hands of poker if you're a strategic edge against the other players, there's a very low probability that the desired outcome will not materialize. Regardless, I feel like there's a mismatch between risk and instability. You see, I think most people say risk when in reality they fear instability. To be extraordinary in anything, you have to be comfortable with instability. Putting your head down and putting in the work for years and years on end with no result. And I definitely was comfortable. To me, this anxiety of just figuring it out was fun. It was exciting. I was a can-do muchacho. I was responsible for myself for the very first time. And frankly, I didn't care if I defaulted on credit card debt or I lost everything. This was America. So here begins the first experiment. When I arrived in Austin, the first thing that I set my eyes on was sales. I knew that anyone willing to work their ass off and work on commission only could make a great living. And I also thought that it would set a very strong foundation for, communication and for doing business in general. Everything in business is sales. If you can't get customers, if you can't sell your product, goodbye. At the same time, I started my first company. It was a liquidation business. In high school, on some weekends, I would flip these liquidation pallets, earn a few $100s, reselling some inventory on eBay. I'd drive up to a warehouse in Pennsylvania, buy a pallet, list the items, and make a solid profit. I thought if I scaled the business to where I was processing truckloads every single week instead of little pallets, and the retailers came directly to me, I built a platform for the retailers to do business with me, I could beat out this $800 million company called Liquidity Services. They have 9 warehouses in the US. However, business ideas don't mean shit until you execute them, and you'll see why. In fact, I went broke after buying some faulty pallets, losing thousands of dollars, spending hundreds of hours trying to sell that inventory, and not being able to make up for it. I didn't realize that the way I was running the business was unsustainable, and slowly the mistakes of this delusion reflected in the mirror. When you're 18 and you take full financial, personal responsibility for yourself, you end up growing up, very, very quickly. You go on this adventure of figuring it out. And I'd like to share some examples, some anecdotes. Although I don't like to reflect on these negative moments, they were very transformative in developing me as an adult. I arrived in Austin. You couldn't rent a car if you were under 21. So I had to figure out how to drive a U-Haul truck. It was silly, but it's the only option I had. And when I was buying a car, I really couldn't afford anything I barely had any money. So I found this car that was older than me, and it required, driving manual stick shift. And I just watched a YouTube video, and I was on the highway 3 minutes later, not knowing what I'm doing, putting on a polo, knocking on thousands of doors. Mind you, I've never done sales. I'm getting brutally rejected every single door. I barely have enough money to pay for gas on the way home because I spent all this money on liquidation inventory. And then waking up the next day after a straight 10 days or 2 weeks of getting rejected and putting on a smile and continuing to approach potential customers. This was for solar. You're playing the role of an entrepreneur, of a business person, just so you can get a lease on an apartment. And then you're writing a fake employment letter from your own company to show that you have the income threshold to move in. Pitching your liquidation business to a venture capitalist downtown. So somehow I was able to meet someone. And you're saying you have a warehouse when reality you have like 1 or 2 storage units. And you're asked how much money is that business making, and you're like, yeah, right now I'm reinvesting all of my profits. I didn't get the investment, if you couldn't tell. You go from working with a solar millionaire. You're young and you're naive. You're convinced that this year I'm going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars selling solar. This is an incredible opportunity. Surely, if the conversion rate is 50% and I'm only doing 20%, surely I'm going to make some commission anytime soon. But no, you knock doors for 2 months, thousands and thousands of doors, and you set 11 appointments, 11 of these consultations, these closes. Some of them your manager takes, some of them you take. 0 of them close. And then you look back and you realize, I just made less than a McDonald's worker in this so-called high income sales position. And better yet, you can't even sell yourself as a golf caddy. You try to get a job as a golf caddy, as a waiter, as a warehouse restocker, and you can't even get a job or a paycheck. You're at the lowest of the lowest rungs of income and employment in the U.S. And then if it couldn't get worse, a few months after I moved to Austin, I couldn't make any money doing solar commissions. My liquidation company was a bust. You get into a nasty car pileup. Your car gets totaled. You don't have insurance, so you don't even have a vehicle anymore. You can't even afford to buy a $2,000 shit box. And now you're just trying to make rent the next month. Forget about being an entrepreneur, being in business. Just try to survive now. And so I remember vividly buying this $50 woman's bicycle, asking the person to deliver it to me. And I don't shy away from these things. I'm proud of these things. I never give up. I'll do whatever it takes. On this $50 woman's bicycle, doing DoorDash just so you can make rent the next month. It's a truly humbling experience. But the number one thing that I learned from all of these initial failures and setbacks was to never give up. And that's a value that will serve anyone unbelievably. Shortly after I lost everything and I was just scraping by, I found myself back in door-to-door sales. I was ready to give it another shot. Even though I just spent 2 months knocking thousands of doors, making 0 commission, something told me, hey, there's this opportunity doing roofing, storm restoration. If a hailstorm comes, the insurance companies pay for roofs. And it's not like a homeowner has to take out a loan to pay for their solar panels. And the insurance company pays for 90% of the roof. And so you take this opportunity doing door-to-door sales and roofing. You're asking yourself, you're wondering, am I making the same mistake I did in solar? And fortunately, coincidentally, 2 gigantic hailstorms hit the greater Austin area that year. You work your ass off. You get better at sales. You improve. You don't give up. And you make 6 figures in commissions in the next 6 months. And personally, that was a life changer. That's the first successful experiment, that little taste of victory that sets you forward. You no longer have to occupy yourself with making money. You're able to go downtown, enjoy the company of a few friends, sip on a $10 iced latte, glare at the magnificent Austin skyline. There's a lot of new development and construction there. I think the city has a solid chance of being a real big technological hub if San Francisco goes to shit, if not the inverse. And you finally feel free, a little bit free for the first time. You're ready to move on and go from surviving to building, to do something greater with yourself. My name is Daniel Deltson. This is the conclusion of episode 2. Be patient for episode 3.